This felt so clever. Janice and I were just saying, felt so clever doing this. And then to me, I thought, oh my gosh, probably people are waking up and thinking, why did they schedule a meeting today? But welcome back. I hope everybody had a nice long weekend, probably. I wanted to just kind of kick off the meeting talking a little bit about last Thursday's event. I know the two of you were able to be there. I just got off the phone with Mr. Davis, and he expressed that he felt like it was a successful event. So I was curious about feedback you have. We haven't ever done anything like that before. And so the intention really was just an acknowledgement of the fact that we knew heading into the November 7th elections, we were going to have just a lot of open seats. I mean, with the number of people that had already announced that they were not going to be running again, we knew that those seats would be taken by new people. And so I'll say from a strategy perspective, we wanted to be able to get an event on the books in before the holiday rush kind of really kicked off. And the window between November 7th and that made it be the Monday before Thanksgiving, which I know wasn't convenient for everybody. So we had a number of people who sent their regrets, saying that they weren't able to make it because of holiday travel and whatnot. But nonetheless, we had a great attendance, I thought. I don't know that we didn't click our people as they came in, but I think we had about 80 RSVPs that said yes, they would be coming. And probably about half of those were actually the elected officials. The other set were local government staff, our partner organizations who we invited to RSVP and that kind of thing. So I feel like it was a pretty intimate gathering where people actually got to talk and mix and mingle, which was nice. And so I'm interested to know.
Why don't you start, Bob? I'm glad you were there. And
we had, of the 5 supervisors, we had 3, 1 returning and 2 new ones. I thought it was very well attended. I was real pleased with, from our standpoint, I was able to introduce to people here on staff and also kind of give them a little background of what PlanRVA capabilities and how they can actually help Powhatan. I don't think we've actually taken advantage as much as we could have. I gave them some examples of what was going on in Goochland and Hanover, and we got to meet a lot of people. So I think it was, look forward to it. I think something that the organization definitely should do on a regular basis. Hopefully maybe not have the turnover as big as we've had this year for everybody, but still, even for the new incoming people, I think it's very beneficial for them. At least to put a name to a face and stuff too.
so you like the fact that they're really a very small program and
Yes,
just mostly open
just open. I was real tickled with how people would go out and connect with other people without really, people, existing members, whether from PlanRVA or from different communities go in Hanover, Chesterfield, Ashland, how people came through and just was glad existing members to talk and welcome the new members. That went very well.
I thought the same thing. I liked the fact it really wasn't much of a program, but there was at least enough that Sean talked about to sort of share perspective. Obviously, as a local elected body, I would think the majority of a new member would be focused on what their primary job is going to be. So Sean shared a perspective that sort of talked about the fact that, sort of when you're sort of back home, and even in a regional setting, you sort of have no choice but to sort of play for the home team. Mm-hmm. But a regional perspective is a little bit different, when you get together at this group. So I think you sort of set the hook a little bit about sort of what this organization is all about, because it is a very unique board,
right?
A very unique organization. So, but other than that, and some welcoming comments from Martha, it really was just food and drink and in the new Henrico Sports facility, which is sort of a cool facility too. So I think that was enough of a hook to bring people into.
It's great. So, yeah, I wasn't able to attend, but I think it was a really good idea to try to, given what was going on this year and just generally the awareness for new folks and existing folks of kind of what goes on here. And I'm glad to hear that the agenda worked well. That feels kind of right. Like it's just about exposure and getting to know some people and catching them when when you can, because there'll be the holidays and then they're gonna be cranking into their, their main jobs, and especially for the new people, there's a lot that they're gonna be doing besides thinking about resources here. So it was good, it was a good window to grab them.
I know the window was it felt a little bit too soon after the election to me. So I don't know if there's anything we can do about that, with the election when it is and holidays when they start, but it just sort of felt, I'm not an elected official, so I don't necessarily have to worry about, what happened to me, and I've been part of the organization, but it just sort of felt like bam, bam, they were sort of going. So I'm glad there really wasn't much of a program. I thought that was sort of, and I didn't notice a lot of, especially even like Tyrone Nelson from Henrico County, very specifically seeking out people
Right.
and walking them around and introducing new people. I thought that was, if that was the entire agenda, that was absolutely perfect. So,
Yeah, I noticed that also, and that was really great. I think you pointed that out too. There were just a lot. Our board members, I feel like, came with a lot of intentionality of introducing people, which was really great. And we had people that are returning elected officials who just don't sit on this board who also came, which was really also the point. It wasn't necessarily just supposed to be the people that sit around this table once a month. It was the entirety of the, so Mayor Trippett was there, which was great to have him. And it's just nice to be able to see some folks that we don't normally interact with. So.
Because that was, with the big turnover that the election brought, I was a little bit nervous with the meeting, if everybody's gonna be kind of standoffish with so many new people that, what do? Do I just stand here, just wait, I'll smile? But no, but it was great that the people that were there, like we said, were outgoing and going around and introducing themselves and making everybody feel welcome, so.
I always have to introduce myself, obviously, as a citizen appointee. And it was amazing how many people said they had no idea we had citizen appointees on the board.
Because only the large jurisdictions have
Because it's only
that.
four, that actually have that, so it's sort of a unique seat, but it was interesting that, that's something that obviously not a lot of people have, it's not well known, so.
One question I have for you all, we did have one legislator, because there was also a lot of changes in the region with the state level seats, and so Skylar Van Valkenburg was there, but we didn't do a lot of, I'll say, one-on-one or one-to-one outreach for our state legislators. And so I was curious, if we think about having the event again, is that something that would be desirable to have a stronger push for invitations, or was it better to have it be what it was?
Right. Which sort of brings back to sort of why we're sort of having this conversation too. It's sort of our job, and whether it's internal communications to try to make people more aware, or external communications, that's sort of why we sort of organize this committee, is to try to make sure we sort of get the word out. So getting the word out to state level elected officials, I would think, is important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that personally invite to them would be beneficial to have them there also, yes. So,
I mean, if you sort of think of it, the reason why you're trying to build relationships is so that you can build trust, so that when this body needs something,
you're right.
then they actually know who you are. You don't want to educate them in 30 days when you're going to stand in front of a microphone and ask for something. So this building relationships is both about personal and then organizational relationships. And obviously with the elevation of some city council members to House seats and the interaction that each of the jurisdictions have, I mean, you guys all have probably a legislative agenda, whether it's formal or informal. You always have legislative priorities. So I can see a scenario where this organization, for the 9-member boards, if this organization can help with the legislative agenda of any of the organizations, that would be why I would think we have to have relationships. I didn't meet Billy Valkenburg when I was there, but I don't know him, he doesn't know me, so if I had a reason to call him,
Yeah,
having met him that night would have been the
he
reason I
stayed
would.
for quite a while,
Did he?
which was also, yeah. My other question was around,
What do you think?
Yeah, I wasn't there to get a beat on how the the networking and connection was working. The only, question to make sure it's wise to expect, make sure we're reaching out to all the state representatives is whether the informality or the contacts made by the more directly connected folks to this body and their various boards and such, if that was, you wouldn't want to sort of make it so many luminaries looking for an opportunity to connect that you lose focus on kind of,
It's a great
dilution. But I don't know if there's any risk of that, and to a certain degree, coming early after the election law has a lot of logistical issues. Everybody's kind of refinding their footing and refinding their connection, and in that sense, having more of the state folks may make a lot of sense.
It's a good balance.
Yeah.
Sort of see if we can maybe identify the guiding principles of the event and make sure we don't get too far away from the guiding principles. And if the guiding principles include some intimacy without an agenda for a lot of our newly elected people at the 9 boards that we do represent, and getting diluted we might dilute that intimacy. So that's a good point.
Certainly a
Bigger
potential risk.
Bigger isn't always better.
Right. The idea of having state folks more aware and knowing who some of those folks are and helping build those relationships is a good thing. Whether it all happens in the one event, I think it's just a question about kind of what do we think works best.
That's a great point.
To that point, we did intentionally invite all members of the commission, the TPO, policy board, and the CVTA.
Yep.
And then we extended the invitation group larger to include all elected officials from each of the 9 jurisdictions and our state legislators. And then we asked each administrator to identify who on their team they would like to bring. So that was an opportunity for them to bring senior staff in some cases, which many of the jurisdictions did do that. I think intimacy is a good word from a guiding principle perspective. And so to observe, and then we had sponsors. So we did reach out to a very small list of organizations that we thought might like to support. So Richmond Region Tourism was a great partner in being kind of our signature sponsor for the evening. Obviously, there's a lot of alignment, some geographical alignment, but a lot of alignment with their board composition and membership. And so Jack Berry and Catherine O'Donnell were really pleased to be a part of the event. The same with RMTA, another regional group, not the same footprint as ours geographically, but the three larger jurisdictions. And so they were happy to be a part of it. And then Richmond Association of Realtors and Virginia Corp, VA Corp, which is insurance provider for municipal local governments, kind of I guess originally it was a spinoff of VACO, but that's a long time ago now. And so I think I was trying to make sure that we didn't create a situation where there were more sponsors in the room than our target audience, kind of back to the guiding principles of the event, or where our invited guests, intended guests, felt like they were being hit up, if you will.
Targeted, yeah.
So I think that that's another kind of careful thing that we have to be thoughtful about. I had a conversation with Dr. Casey leading up to the event and thinking about whether we should think about in future years being more intentional that it is a regionally co-hosted event. And so, we kind of intentionally did not do that this year. The Chamber and GRP and Richmond Region Tourism host a pretty big event every year.
Yeah, this week.
That's this Wednesday evening.
In the same place.
It's a little bit more kind of community, kind of, I saw it was
Have
advertised today.
you been to the facility? You should go.
Yeah, you should get, so it's that is a paid event that you pay a registration to attend, and it's open to the public, so it's a much larger event, and obviously the membership of those three organizations are broader than the 9 jurisdictions from a sector perspective. And so I think I'm interested to know what your all's thoughts are on that, because we do have, I'll say, sister organizations that serve the region and are structured similarly, but they do have, from a membership perspective, a broader obligation, which compounds the scale of the event.
Well, too, so you reach out for sponsors to try, just help defray costs?
We did, because this was not a budgeted event this
Right.
year, and so for us, putting on a kind of a social event like this was a, you know, so we can budget differently for next year.
Well, that's what I was thinking, you know, if it's budgeted, then we control the
That's right.
agenda and we control the value proposition because there are no sponsors.
Right.
When you have sponsors, they want it to be generally a broader event, which if intimacy is what we're interested in, we might budget for the event instead.
Sure.
That may make sense.
Well, and you can imagine that the 4 sponsors that we did have enjoyed very much the intimacy of the event, because they otherwise would not have been there. So,
But going forward, I could see both the cost going up and the demand for attendance to go up, so people, they're begging for their buck from a sponsorship
Right.
perspective. And then how does it work? How come that doesn't have to be a public event if all of your board members are there? How do
we
we get-
post it as such, but we just don't, I mean,
Technically, somebody, if they wanted to come, they could come? Is that really the way that works? And that would be the case whether we have sponsors or not?
Right.
Okay, so we check that box by
yeah,
technically.
talked it
it's-
through with Eric, and
Okay.
yeah.
I don't know if that constrains any of your colleagues from thinking about going to these events or not. I do know in certain cases, people say, well, only 2 of us can go.
Yeah,
2 of us
you
can
can
go.
go on too.
So, but that obviously wasn't a concern.
Well, and I think depending on the jurisdiction, I'll take Charles City as an example, only 1 elected official was actually there because the other 2 haven't been sworn in yet.
Yeah, and that's
So
the
that's
same way
the
as
same thing
ours, yeah,
with
we had,
Palatine.
even though we had 3 there, only
They're
1
not
was
elected,
elected,
okay.
the 2 were non.
Hmm.
But I think you get her to skirt around that by kind of advertising and open it to the public that everybody knows.
But it just might be another point that we make sure that all of our elected officials are comfortable that we've already checked that box.
Right, mm-hmm.
You know,
That's a good point.
just to make sure that people don't wonder.
Yeah, and I'll have to check on, I know with the other elected officials, I might just touch base with ours just to see if that's the reason why some of them didn't come. Maybe they thought that was gonna be a conflict if they had more, they had 3 there or more.
Right.
This is a more of a logistical mechanical issue on our side, but I did notice, because we used the Eventbrite platform for people to register, there's not a way to RSVP no.
Yeah.
So a couple of people reached out, more than a couple, a handful of people reached out directly to say, I'm not coming because they kept getting the emails. And so that was a little bit of an aha for me, that in our world, people are used to being able to say yes or no, and not being able to say no, we don't get to track that kind of information. Was it a scheduling conflict? Was it a,
Right.
so.
Any feedback that you hear, let's keep
Yes.
the conversation going. Obviously, trying to keep, this is organized today for 2 reasons. One, this and the next event we're going to talk about. But we should keep that dialogue open and continue to provide feedback to staff to make sure that when it's time to think about doing that again, we don't forget about all this good feedback. Any other thoughts on it? All right. 5 is
So I
Commissioner
really,
training.
on the heels of the last committee meeting and the conversation that we had, I think it would be a mistake not to engage this committee in thinking through the elements of our new commissioner orientation. Now, I say that with the truth that we do not know who our commissioners will be. So some of the jurisdictions will be working through having more seats than they have before because of population increasing. So I think we've got 1 community that's getting another seat because of that. We went through the charter change now 2 years ago, which enables localities to think about the allocation of their voting seats a little bit differently. And so I think that each of the jurisdictions and those that I've spoken to, I know are working through, do we give everybody the opportunity, say like in our larger jurisdictions where there are enough seats for every person on the elected board, do we give everyone the opportunity to sit on the board to get familiarity and that kind of a thing, or do we, sort of allocate, and I don't know yet how those jurisdictions are going to treat their opportunity for appointment. So I'll talk about this later as well, but one of the things that Janice is doing is convening, I think in the next week or two, our locality clerks, just one, so that they have a chance, to meet with each other and just talk. And it's another opportunity for us to just be able to interact with those folks, but also so that we can start to have a little bit of a better communication. A lot of times it's a person on the other side of an email address. And so getting to know these people a little bit better, we think will be helpful when we need to share information and that kind of thing from an appointments perspective. But they, I think, as professionals in their localities, have a lot of desire to want to be able to connect with each other and just share amongst themselves best practices and those connections and be, there's a state municipal clerks organization, but that's statewide, and so this will create kind of a little bit more cohesion in the region. But we're preparing to provide that communication before the end of this calendar year to those folks so that they can start to think about how to channel that into the committee and meeting appointment structure. Most of the jurisdictions, I think, are doing some preliminary planning now about what their local leadership is going to be, how that's going to stack up, and then what the regional appointments are. Depending on the jurisdiction, I think that there's 60 or more appointments that localities have to deal with at the organizing meeting. So it's a lot. And so we want to be sensitive to that. And most jurisdictions will meet once in January, some meet twice, but most will meet once, and they're typically in the latter part of the month, which means for a February commission meeting, we seldom actually know who our appointed members are going to be until right at the time of pushing the packet out.
Does that sync up, from an aspect of organizational meetings in the town?
As far as I know, that works fine, but it's a much smaller organization to navigate through. I made a note to follow up with Mayor Trivett about, anticipating shifting a lot of things around.
Right.
But I could imagine in some of the large jurisdictions, it's a bigger effort, and there's a bunch of other things that they're trying to take care of administratively in those early meetings too. So,
but structurally, nothing changes for town.
And I'm expecting that Dr. McGraw will be the person that will be appointed back from the town council.
I think ultimately it was probably a very positive thing. There were quite a number of candidates for council.
Yeah.
But we ended up having relatively minimal actual change.
Right.
And so I suspect that Dr. McGraw and I will continue to play these roles. But we'll see. The council does like to kind of shift around sort of who's connected where. But given Dr. McGraw's plugged in as an officer here and all that kind of stuff, I think he'll suggest he not be moved, and I think that's where he'll stay. But like I say, there are other jurisdictions that have had more change and potentially more, flow down to the appointed position.
And there's
so let me just ask. So in the organizational agenda for the town, you think PlanRVA is in the top 10 of something that would be top of mind for council members to be aware of?
I do. I think when I initially came into this, I was not aware of the various boards and roles and who they were plugged into, but I think council is, and the role with transportation and tourism and here and all that is pretty important. It's definitely top 10.
Okay. Just going to measure it for next year. I'm going to ask the same question to see how well our outreach is.
We're going to be in top 5.
Yeah, I was going to say, and then this committee's we're doing its job,
Absolutely.
So how about you guys? I mean, when is your organizational meetings and all that kind of stuff?
Be January, after the new board takes over, which would be the third week in January. I imagine Steve, who's already one of the board of supervisor members that's on this, will remain. Imagine I'll remain. And so be replacing Mike's spot would be the one. So being a smaller group of people, it's not going to be as much change as what some of the larger community, even though we did have a big turnover, it's just mainly replacing that one person. But yeah, same thing, that it's PlanRVA is one of the top 10 spots for
You
sure.
think so?
Yeah,
Okay.
with us. And hopefully I'll be able to, already been trying to put bugs in people's ear about we need to take advantage of what's offered here. So hopefully I'll move up to top 5.
A little meter.
That's right.
So next year when you ask.
Well, so the other thing that sort of occurs to me is we, during our strategic planning process, wanted to make sure that there was a right balance between, obviously, the board members who sit on this organization and the managers and administrators that we also have to have a relationship with. So would this be best communicated through the manager and administrators' offices? Or do you guys like, because you're represented on the board, that this communication happens through?
Our county administrator was here for the meeting, so which is good. So I mean, I always think it has a little more emphasis if it does if he's actually, that person's included in the correspondence and stuff too, so yes.
I would think so too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say as a practice, I try to communicate directly and I'll say informally with all of the administrators so that they have the same information, but let the dynamics of the locality happen as they need to for the decision making around who is appointed. I know there are differing philosophies. Because PlanRVA is staff, well, because the TPO, the CVTA and PlanRVA are hosted here and sort of staffed, so there are some jurisdictions that adhere to a philosophy that the same person's going to come to all three because it's part of this family. And there are other jurisdictions who like to assign different people to the three because they like the ability to give that regional exposure to more people on the board. And it really is different locality to locality on that philosophy.
Right.
Not small and large, or there's not like a breaking line that you can predict that.
Ours, we took the ladder that we have different people on different boards, and so instead of the same, even though it kind of makes sense to have the same person going to all three since it's kind of tied together, but they chose to do it separately. So.
I guess what I'm trying to sort of reach to is sort of what's in the training, when the training happens. I would welcome the institutional knowledge of the administrators and the managers that have seen multiple board members serve on this organization for good and bad reason. And if the administrators and the managers say, you really need to hit these 10 things because that'll help me get the support that I need from my elected officials to support the organization, that would resonate with me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to your question about sort of who's the right person in the jurisdiction to help drive it, my thought is both. Like the administrative person's going to have a perspective. They also have a bunch of other things going on, and we may be in a position to say, hey, have you thought about this, or prioritize that one, or this is working well. You know what I mean? So I don't know if that's where you were going, but I think
I agree with both. I do, because we need champions, and the manager administrator is not going to be the champion. That's more the tactician.
right. And I think they, at least from the town's perspective, I think they definitely see the value of what comes from this organization, but they're, like I said, they're juggling 50 things, trying to get the agenda straight for the next meeting and what all the appointments are, and so also having a little bit of championing, or have you thought about how this could benefit, or whatever would be in their interest and the organizations.
So I think you're right where my head is and trying to think this through. I've done some research and had a chance to go to our national conference and then also talk to the different people around here, and the best practice around how to do a new board member orientation is as varied as you can imagine that it is. The last few years, history of this organization is that we used to host a single day new commissioner orientation. It was a jointly held event with newly appointed people to the commission and the TPO. We had a binder that was provided that was the ABCs of the MPO and the PDC. And oftentimes you've heard Mrs. O'Bannon talk about that in our full commission meetings.
Yep.
That was around for the last, until the last maybe like 6 years ago. And the feedback from the people that were joining the board at that time we couldn't get them to come to a single meeting. And so we went to one-on-one meetings. I think in the time that you joined, we did a virtual onboarding because that was the only way we could see people at that particular point in time. I think Mr. Chambers, you and I met for coffee or something like that.
Yeah, I was a little bit off cycle, but
So
we just met and kind of walked through various materials and.
So in my tenure, we've done the super structured event that we struggled to get people to come to, and then we did a lot of follow-up one-on-ones after that. And then we had the virtual window where we hosted a number of virtual meetings, which actually kind of worked out a little bit well. I think it actually was sort of a Powhatan-centric onboarding that we ended up just by the scheduling that it worked out. And then we've done the one-on-one. So we've kind of done the whole gamut. One of the conversations that this committee had previously led me to believe that going back to at least offering that group setting orientation would be important, because one of the big values that I think members say that they get from serving on this board is the ability to get to know leaders from around the region. And so if our orientation doesn't spark that from the get-go, it feels like that's a missed opportunity to really do that. We have had some of our more seasoned members occasionally do an orientation because they just wanted to get a refresh, which has been kind of nice. But I am always aware that time is precious for all of you. And so to set up a separate time feels a little bit overwhelming to be able to find when that magic window of time would be. All of that to say, one of the ideas that I had was perhaps leveraging the February commission meeting as sort of a hybrid. It could be a refresh for returning commissioners, especially since many returning commissioners are in this weird window where it was a virtual and it was a one-on-one. And so we could have a structured refresh, but it would also serve that purpose for the very first meeting for some of these folks. No matter who I talk to, I am told that if you don't get people oriented very soon after they join the organization, you will not get them to come to meetings because they don't understand why, and then they'll feel like they're too late in the game and they just won't ever really feel like they can attach in. And so I think I'm in this funny stage where I feel like we need to have a date on the calendar that says this is when it's happening, so that as soon as those folks know that they're going to be appointed or they're seeking appointment to this board, they can mark that on their calendar and they know that that's an important date. And then we can certainly do makeups or one-on-ones, for anybody that can't attend.
I like
so that's an idea.
Yeah, but I like that idea because I think either other members would appreciate the refresh. I think they could add value to the onboarding, because we could find a way to engage them, not just sit and listen.
Yes.
And then to some degree, if people miss that and we need to do follow-up, then hopefully they regret they missed it because it was done so well that it becomes one of those things on the calendar that it's a little bit easier to do that than have recurring meetings be memorable or Zoom meetings be memorable.
Right.
So we try to make that meeting the memorable one of 2024 kind of thing.
So I'm glad to hear that. My thought was that perhaps it could be we could institutionalize it that the new commissioner orientation is an event hosted by the Public Outreach and Engagement Committee. And so it really is more, certainly staff has a significant role to play in the delivery and the development of the content. But I think my gut says that content delivery actually by members of the body is much more engaging than staff talking at people. And so I think that there's a balance to strike there, but my thinking is that if we could structure the agenda such that it's more, perhaps the more, I'd say, administrative functions of the board are delivered by the staff, but then the other elements of, what it is to be a member of this commission, how to take advantage of and sort of think about the interaction between the regional table and going back to the home team, that feels like it's better communicated by the members of the commission and not by staff.
I agree 100%.
Yes.
And even me, as in charge of this committee, but not an elected official, I would sort of look to the committee members to actually provide that content, because it is your endorsement and to some degree your rallying cry that would get your colleagues excited about it. So, what do you think?
No, I think it makes sense, and I think you're right that, Martha, that some of there's an opportunity to resonate more with folks, to say, like, here's a grant we were able to cooperatively identify, here's some research that helped inform our recent change here in Chesterfield or wherever it is, right? And I think when folks are taking in a lot of new information and trying to understand where this fits in the mosaic of things that they're responsible for now or whatever, that some of the grounded, here's why this is a great opportunity and here's why these are folks you need to know, I think it could be a stronger message coming from the current commissioner.
Yeah, because I was going to add a very similar thing, is have members that have actually talk about different scenarios from the organization where they've actually used PlanRVA and what benefits that has come from PlanRVA as examples. This is what we did. This is how they helped us. To me, that always will trigger people's mind to start thinking, hey, if Goochland was able to do this, or the town of Ashton was able to do this, why cannot Powhatan utilize the same thing? So.
Yeah, the word I'm sort of thinking about, as you're talking about, is tell stories.
Right.
And stories are what are memorable.
Right.
Sort of the administrative side of the acronyms.
I mean,
That's just sort of one of the funny stories we all have to deal with.
Instead of saying, this is what could happen, this is actually what did happen, and this is what, the benefit that we receive from this.
And if it's recorded, and those stories are recorded, or they're even presented in a sort of sales video kind of pitch at that meeting, then we could reuse that content.
That's right.
That's a good idea.
It could travel too. It could be presented at that orientation meeting, but that content could travel. Bobby's telling a story.
Right.
We can use that for multiple different things.
To me, I feel like serving on the commission is 3, maybe 4-pronged. There's obviously the governance of fiduciary responsibility. I mean, whenever you join a board, there's that responsibility. And I think that that's content that needs to be delivered, just sort of the basic structure, how many people do we have on staff, what's the financial commitment, what's our financial health, those kinds of things. I think any board member needs to know, even if they're not super excited about that information. But then I think that there's the reality that this is a member-driven organization, and so how do commissioners start to think about what it means to be a member of the organization? Are they getting the value that they're putting in, that ROI discussion and some of that? I think a piece of that slides back to governance, but it's also sort of a member services discussion, which has been a theme that we've been chatting about a lot over the last 6 or so months. And then I think that there's this bigger piece of responsibility that sometimes, frankly, is a little bit harder for probably a person that's new sitting around the table to think about. But the purpose of the regional one of the purposes of the Regional Planning District Commission model in Virginia is to prepare a regional strategic plan. So, there is very much this idea that the sum of the parts is greater. And so how do we start to think about what are those objectives that the collection of the 9 jurisdictions want to pursue regionally? And that certainly isn't the whole inventory of every priority in every one of the 9 jurisdictions, but it's some subset of that this organization as a group of leaders or as implemented by its staff, is intended to pursue. So I kind of think about laying out an orientation in that same way. But that's how I think about it as a staff person. That may not be how members think about it. And so I'm curious, maybe in hindsight, what do you wish had been part of your orientation, or what do you think are the critical things that new members need to know?
And I was just gonna say, I like your sort of 4 prongs. And my thought, at least come back to when I was coming to this new, or somebody else who's newly appointed and trying to understand what is this about and what is my role here, would be to hit the sort of structure around the 4 things, but there's the being part of this organization brings benefits to the locality. Here's kind of all the things you get by being part of the bigger organization. And then secondly, the bigger organization is more than just the sum of its parts and its services, because we're able to achieve all these things because of how regional planning commissions are set up. And then the more based on what kind of organization it is, here's how the funding and structure works. And then, what I'm saying, like just a little bit of the sort of
What's in it
critical,
for me?
the critical business need, we call it, but the
that
what's,
flow makes more sense.
yeah. But I think that feels right. And I do think what we often end up spending time on here, and it's appropriate, is the sort of keeping the organization running, keeping the budget right, keeping things covered, and certain things that are required. It's time to submit this, it's time to do that, whatever. And we don't want people to lose the forest for the trees.
That's a great point.
How would you start it? How would you start the orientation?
From a new person standpoint, it would just be sort of history of the organization. A lot of times people think that Chesterfield, Hanover, and Henrico being a part of it, that the small communities, counties are not going to be able to benefit because of what the big boys are able to do. In reality, the smaller communities, counties have a lot of opportunities to use what Chesterfield, Henrico, Hanover, Ashland has to offer from their perspective. So there is a benefit there, but that has to be brought out to the counties that, hey, yeah, you might be a small fish in an ocean, but take advantage of that ocean that there's a lot there that you can feed from. And so that's the one thing, because coming here, I've heard from other people that are no longer, that the larger counties benefit more. That's not true at all. Not now that I've been here and I've seen what happens, that's not true one bit. So I just think that needs to be kind of brought out and just talked about so that everybody feels that they're on the same level ground. One's not above the other. And so
Yeah, that's a great point. It's sort of it's a force multiplier. By being involved here, the impact is bigger, whether you're big county or small or whatever.
Yeah, I sort of like the idea of sort of starting with the sort of aspirational, sort of what's in it for me kind of story side, and then have it sort of trickle down to the more boring financial
Oh, yeah.
stuff. You know, I mean, even our agenda sometimes goes through finances, and 75% of the meeting is the budget committee.
Yeah.
And running the organization.
Right.
As a board member, my attitude is, isn't it the audits committee? Shouldn't that all be done at the committee meeting and you sort of report out for 5 minutes at the board meeting kind of thing? But I understand we're a member-run organization, so to some degree the work does get done at the committees. But I like the idea sometimes of inverting it, letting the cool, fun stuff be first, and then the organizational and the history and the finance part being sort of later.
I think from some of the feedback that I've gotten from our chair, our vice chair, this could be a good model to think about changing the structure of our meetings too. This is really helpful because
I love, there's got to be, just because you used the words, and I was, it'd be cool to find a very professional, non-selfish phrase for what's in it for me. Because that is what people show up in a room thinking.
Right.
But when you say it that way, it sounds selfish.
Yeah.
You know, but I even use it sometimes with my kids. When the kids want to do something, I'll say, well, what's in it for me? And it isn't that I'm trying to get something out of it, it's just that I really want my kids to actually go achieve something if I do this stuff for them, you know? So maybe that'd be our task. What's a better way of doing it that doesn't sound such as a smart ass, you know? Sorry, I cut you off.
No, yeah, no. I'm just, this is really, really helpful. And I was gonna say too, Janice and Sid have been working on creating a digital platform, and I know that not every board member will be as comfortable with that, but we are looking for ways, and have for the last several years, to sort of streamline the physical material, because I think we can all admit that while it's nice to be given that binder on the first day to look through it, it seldom gets opened back up again. And so we've been working to create a digital space that can have all of the kind of content that people could revert back to. And I think more jurisdictions are pushing to kind of a digital type of a thing. And so we're trying to follow with the times. And so some of the things that would have only historically been available in that one orientation meeting a year are going to be available on this platform where people can access it whenever they want to, and in the context of when they need it. We hear that a lot about the list of acronyms. That'll be something that people could refer to when they don't know what that acronym is, not when you're barraged with 75 of them at the very beginning of your term on the commission. So I'm saying that because the flow of this that we're talking about, that better said, what's in it for me, stories, member benefit, you know, the sum of the parts, and then moving into the more kind of administrative operational part, that can be backed up by, here's the platform where you can always come back and retrieve that information as you need it.
Yeah,
So you don't have to focus as much on that information because it's going to be available whenever you want it.
yeah, and I think that's great, and we definitely, or I believe, are going in the right direction, having more sort of online content that you can go back to or search, or we can easily update when it changes, that kind of thing. And what strikes me, and I think this is where you go, Martha, is the orientation can fly a little bit high and touch on, here's the part of our online materials that goes into more detail on this. Here's an example of how this was used, and you can find more examples online. You know what I mean? So it's the walking through, here are sort of big themes that you need to know, and here's more stuff. And some of the stuff we could actually leverage in the meeting if we need to, you know, go through 3 slides that talk about the relationship with CTA or whatever it is, right? If that's important. But for people to connect that they have that resource and then get the context from sort of how that resource works from the orientation would kind of feels time efficient,
Right.
and impactful.
One thing I want to make sure, in my opinion, was sort of helpful during the strategic plan. One of the skill sets and the expertise that we identified is that this organization is great at convening people. Even if the subject matter experts that we're convening aren't what we have in-house, but there is a profession and to some degree a brand that you can create by being a great convener. That's why this whole space was sort of created. So to me, I mean, that would be something that I would want in that message to everybody. I'd love for you guys to say, hey, why don't we, go ahead, PlanRVA, run that event for us, or do something like that for us, because that's another way, that's like the flywheel. That gives us a way to go reach more people. The only real expertise we're providing is the expertise in convening the right individuals, but it also sort of plays into the whole idea about outreach.
I would actually add the opposite of that can be true, is that the committee members help us get the word back to their localities as well, and that we are all stronger when we are utilizing the power of our networks. Because there are times where we need input as an organization on all of the projects we're doing, and we don't have inroads into every single community, but you all do. And so your power is being able to bring the word back to your places.
That's true.
So there's enough feedback for,
Yeah, this is really, really helpful. I'm thinking if we are, I think my hope coming out of today's meeting would be that there would be a perspective from a point of view from this committee about exactly this, the kind of the content and the flow and then the timing. Does it make sense to you to recommend to Mr. Davis using the February 8th meeting time as this time?
I think yes, although when you said 8th, I thought that was a date. I actually know I'm gonna be out of the country then.
Are you?
So, but again, I mean, that doesn't mean the work can't be done. That means like nothing sacred but the mission, in my opinion, is that the committee's engaged and we can do this. So something about February because it's so early in the month. It's what resonated with me. But even with that, I would still say yes. It's an important enough thing to do that it should be the bulk of a standing meeting, in my opinion.
I just, with the way Powhatan's board meetings are being the third week of every month, I don't know, and the board just being sworn in January, say the 20th, whatever that third Monday is, I don't know if they will actually have the appointees for these commissions by the 8th.
We often run into that with some of our counties. So by my calendar, the third Wednesday, using Powhatan as an example, is January 17th, which interestingly, just how the dates fall is still 3 weeks away from February 8th. But that really requires that all of it happens. And I know one of our other jurisdictions, the planning commission member, for example, doesn't get appointed by the board of supervisors. They're appointed by the planning commission, who doesn't meet until the last week of the month. So I mean, we have all of those funny things that happen that make it very clear that a January meeting, which is why we don't meet in January, because it's very clear that that's not, but it makes a February meeting really difficult. I'll just say from a scheduling perspective, the transportation forum that we host is scheduled for Friday the 15th. And the thought was that would be in lieu of the Thursday, March 14th full commission meeting. So I mean, you see where I'm going. We're already sort of, we don't pick a special date. So these are the things that Janice and I, in talking through and looking at the calendar, didn't feel like we wanted to make recommendations in a vacuum. So you are our guides with what you think the right way to navigate.
We might have to get some feedback from, I mean, if preference in Powhatan is February 8th is too quick, just logistically, and that's the same for 5 out of 9 jurisdictions, then that sort of rules. That may put us off a standing date, more to a special date. So maybe we need to go back to ask.
Would this be one of those times where we leverage you all, plus I do the outreach to the administrators?
Yeah,
get the collective
to
wisdom.
Tim's point, it feels like we might need to do a little more detective work and make sure we know what we're walking into in terms of different appointments and timing. I am in favor of using an existing board meeting if we can, just because my sense is there's going to be an awful lot going on for folks, even post-holiday, because they're really getting into their jobs. And we might miss out if they, there's a special Tuesday night thing they have to fit in or whatever it is. But if we can't logistically get enough of the people there, then we're gonna have to do
I don't know that there's anything sacred about the second Thursday of the month, other than the fact that that's when we've met for however long that's when we've met. So,
other than some of us plan around that, but.
I mean, yeah, so it's, I think in addition to doing that outreach, we could do a bit more detective work to understand how this fits into the flow of other meetings, to see, I'm regularly aware that there are boards that meet the Wednesday evening before our commission meeting, and when those boards adjourn at 11:30, 1 a.m., that kind of thing, an 8 a.m. meeting is a pretty hard. So I mean, there might be some things that we just need to learn about our own meeting schedule that make it hard for people to come. So we can do that detective work.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
some
I think
detective
I'm
work.
wondering if this committee
And
should
then-
meet
then
again
the-
between now and.
I was gonna say, I mean, the way to make the scheduling easier is to make it such a compelling meeting that people wanna be
Right.
there. And if that is more important than the date, then if we do it well, people wanna be there.
Yeah.
So we absolutely should work on content.
The other context thing, at least as I'm hearing the discussion, for January, we're not having a commission meeting because there's so much going on. March, we're combining with the other because otherwise we'd be duplicative. So if February came a little bit later because that's what we learned, and then in April, we got back to a more
The regular.
regular, that'd be fine. Like, people are just gonna be figuring out,
Right.
just tell me where I need to be kind of thing.
Yeah, you're right, you're right. And I will say too, I mean, just kind of from a global sense, Miles and I have already been talking, again, it's separate but we're related. The TPO is typically will meet the first Thursday of the month, which historically has had a lot of the same people, not always, but sometimes. That is in conflict with the VML VACO legislative day at the Capitol, and that's like the local government day, which again, historically, a lot of our folks attend that, and so having a meeting in competition. So we're talking with the TPO leadership in the next week or so about that as well. So I mean, there's just sort of a lot in flux that I think we could take, if this committee feels like taking a little bit of a step back to look at what fits better all the way around, we could do that.
Yeah, let's
Okay.
take a step back and then let's plan to get together and have like
Okay.
a working session to make sure we're working on the content and make sure we feel good about the event.
Would the three of you prefer December or January? I think early January would be as late as we'd want to go, just because content wants to be the driver of compelling people to want to come.
Preference?
Either,
Just
I
put
mean,
together a
once
set of
it-
dates and kind of see.
Yeah, as long as we're not too close, right around the 25th of December, then either either is fine with me.
Okay,
Same here. yeah,
Janice, can
exactly.
we work on putting together the three of us, maybe a set of dates and we'll get a poll out?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just wanted to add one thing to what Tim was saying about, by making sure it's a compelling meeting and it's really clear to people what they're getting out of it, will increase attendance. We also want to make sure that people who have been on the commission and are going to continue to be on the commission don't think this is one that they can skip because it's just orientation for the new people.
Correct.
That was a
We
good
want
point, good point.
we want
Who are
them
there-
to help
Yeah,
with the
Their input is
stories.
necessary,
And by the way, it'll be useful to them to review the material,
Yeah.
revisit the connections, and we'll make sure there's other stuff on the agenda too, but no, I like where this is going, but I do think there's more work to.
Yeah, to do it well.
I'll
Anything
just,
agenda
it's
wise?
okay, I'll just quickly share, because I know we're right at the hour. We did just want to let this committee know about potentially a future opportunity, I think, to talk about it at another committee meeting. I don't know, Holly or Janice, if it's easier or better for either of you to take this, but structurally speaking, there is a citizens technical or community technical advisory committee of the RRTPO. So it sits within a different structure, but that committee has been going through quite a bit of conversation over the last few months about its role and sort of evolving purpose and what it can do. And I think that it is going to have a larger public outreach function. And so we didn't want you all to not be aware of that.
Yeah. That's agenda item 6. It's in progress, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity for overlap between what CTAC is doing and what this committee is doing, but 3 things that were really illuminating that came out of the last CTAC meeting were requests from the members and things that we decided that as a staff we should give them, and I think that they would be helpful for this committee too. So to put in your brains for the orientation is an engagement calendar. Like, what is the cadence of all of the ways we engage the public in a year? And to be honest, I'd love that too, because I've only been here for 3 months and I would also like to see that. And so I don't think it exists in a pretty form. I think we know what it is, but I think putting that in a way to give to a committee member to say, here are the times where we're gonna need your help in engaging the public and on what. So I think that's one thing that we promised we would give them, which I think you all should have too. The second is a media toolkit, is give us some language for how to talk about these things. I think that we were making some assumptions about how knowledgeable people were, and everyone was coming with a different knowledge base about how can I talk about these things and what do you want me to say? So even if it's just a simple, like, here are some sample languages, here are 2 sentences you can say, again, point them to this kind of cadence of the calendar. Media toolkit sounds way fancier than I think I mean it, but it gives it some gravitas, but also it can be simple. And the third was the who's in my community is an exercise that I'm gonna call it, is that some of the committee members said, hey, we don't actually know where the places are you want us to take things. Like, you keep saying, bring this back to my community, but I don't know where I'm supposed to take it. And so that was really eye-opening to help identify, okay, who are the players in my community? Who are the groups that need to hear this information? You as an individual, Brent, might be connected to 2 of them, but you might actually be connected to 10, but you didn't think about it in that way because nobody had ever asked before. And so the chair of that committee actually suggested that she could start putting together almost like a Venn diagram of like, where are all the, where are the people? Are there places of worship? Are there school systems? Are there community groups like the Rotary? Are there social groups? And that sounds really obvious, but it's different in every locality and also the same. And so I think being able to say, oh, do you have X, Y, and Z in your town? Great, so does Goochland, so does Powhatan. Here's what they're called. And so just kind of outlining where the places are that engagement can happen could also, I think, apply to this committee.
I just wanted to say thank you for that. And I wanted to say thank you for you all. This committee doesn't take a lot of action, but the discussion and the meetings are always really helpful for us. And I think that there's been a real shift in the energy about this organization. And we as a staff are trying to adapt to that. We've been pretty comfortable and sort of, we go do this work and then we come and report on what we think you would care about. And I think what we are trying to do, is demonstrated by what Holly is saying, is really lean into this fact that a lot of the people that we interact with, whether they're on a committee or a board or at any place in the different org structures that we support, people are saying, well, if I'm going to have my name attached to this, I'm going to spend time in my schedule on this organization, I actually want to be a part of it. And here's how I'm willing to do that. Like, people are good at setting their boundaries, right? But we're trying to lean into being responsive to that and not just saying, oh, they just show up for that hour and we're going to talk at them for an hour and then everyone's going to leave and go back to their lives. So I think I appreciate your all's indulgence in us working through these things, because it probably in the history of the agency hasn't been entirely natural for us. But I think that the people on our staff, particularly now, are really much very receptive to it, and so we're working quickly on the other side of the hallway to think about how to lean into that. So even like this conversation, the last 2 CTAC meetings have just been really exciting for us as staff to say, oh, there's this group of people that actually care about this stuff. We could take their advice and probably together do a better job. So. But I think that there will be opportunities for us to think about how that work that the CTAC is trying to do in the specific focus of outreach to the community around transportation planning, how that relates to what this committee has been talking about.
Correct. That sounds great.
And the last thing I'll just say from the discussion that we had last time, I've asked a number of our different staff members to re-listen to the recording from the September committee meeting. But I did want to just share, I mean, Tim, you mentioned this earlier, you know, one of the things that this organization does quite a bit of is convening. And so I think we're going to try to be more vocal with the board about the convening that we do, because just by a quick count, there's about 7 or 8 different groups of locality staff that we convene on a monthly or quarterly basis. And so I think we want to try to figure out a way not to bog you down with reports just for the sake of reports,
Right.
but to be able to better communicate the touch points that we have and the opportunities. So it's the planning directors, our small jurisdictions, local economic development directors. You heard for a moment from Janice about the clerks, our emergency managers, the transportation, I'll say lead staff members in transportation planning. We convene a number of different people from public works and public utilities. We convene the public information officers on an ad hoc basis, interact with sometimes the HR folks and sometimes the finance directors. So a number of different departmental and functional positions in the localities. Not all of their titles are the same across the jurisdictions, but we try to find people that have kind of like responsibilities. And some of them are more formalized, like transportation or emergency management than others, but you know, we're doing that. And so we're going to try to figure out ways that we can sort of better tease out that conversation. And I probably forgot a couple of them too. Litter managers just came to mind.
That occurs to me that I'm not a big fan of creating reports, but in awareness and engagement, reports are necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And so it might make sense actually, if those are regular monthly meetings, is actually to send a report to this committee
We could do that.
that talks about sort of convening activities under this scenario. I mean, we had a scenario, at least our firm, you know, where we had multiple people that were sort of focused on outreach and business development and things like that. And we had a hard time getting them to report their activities because they basically were thinking they were promoting themselves to some degree. To try to get an engineer to go do something was hard enough, but then actually to get them to write it down and report what they were doing was completely impossible. So we literally went out and we hired a true salesperson who was a non-engineer, and she has no problem promoting herself whatsoever. So she started sending this monthly report around, and then everybody else said, well, shit, she's doing it, I gotta do it too. And we sort of led by example. And so now we get about a dozen of these reports, and you always can read something and learn something. And then you might also read something and it might spark something that we can sort of.
Positive peer pressure in a way, like, oh, look, they're doing it, I want to do that.
Yeah. So if you're convening those organizations and we sort of hear about it and you know about it and you know about it and the rest of the committee knows about it, it could either spark you to say, well, guess what? You know, my economic development director wasn't there, how come? Or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely.
And if it's just factual and you can do it in a template that doesn't really take any time, it's just populating it once a month and circulating it, that might be another thing. And then when we do our report at the actual board meeting, some of that can be content.
Okay, yeah, I think we can work on that.
And some of that content can be very reinforcing of the benefits of participating and connecting. And we can raise up to the commission, look at something that came out of all the clerks getting together last month that we're now acting on.
Yeah.
And those kind of, I think a lot of times the stories about the results and we found a gold nugget and turned it into a new opportunity kind of thing, those are very motivational and remind people, like, come connect and use the resources here. And you know, it's a very, knowing what's going on will probably identify a few good stories that helps with the overall engagement.
Yep.
I think.
They finally got that.
Yeah, they got that giant piece of furniture and now they dropped it.
Yeah, it just fell out of the elevator.
Furniture.
They were moving furniture and it was like that.
They had this giant desk that
It
fit
was
through the
that-
door, but it wouldn't fit past the little, like,
Oh
eighth of
my
an inch
goodness.
number
Oh.
sticker on the side of the door frame, of the elevator door frame. It was
We were,
wild.
You know, watching.
Stuck.
And Tim and I couldn't get up the elevator until they finished, so we're just gonna have to watch it.
So I think Flo is moving in on the 4th floor, and I met some people in the elevator this morning that didn't know how to get up because they don't have fobs, and they're like, "This is my first day, but I don't know how to." So yeah, I guess that they're really moving in. Well, this is great. This has been really wonderful. I was
Well,
just gonna say,
that's the pharmaceutical.
Yeah,
company.
yeah, so I mean,
That
I'm
was
excited
actually
about their,
incubated out of Medicine for All, what Dr. Gupton and Dr. Edwards created.
What is it called?
So
Flow,
it
PHLW.
is the strategic medicine reserves for the entire United States.
Oh, right.
So we actually produce all the generic medicines for the entire United States on a 24/7 continuous basis, such that when we hit a pandemic or we have to deploy something, it's all right in Petersburg.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It's a fascinating story, and it was all sort of incubated by Dr. Edwards and Dr. Gupton. And a lot of it sort of occurred, sort of during the pandemic and all that kind of stuff, but it's actually what.
And it'll be a game changer for delivery of like critical medicines like insulin, and it's gonna make the insertion of the active ingredient that turns the non-active thing into the thing. It's gonna make, I mean, it's just gonna change affordability of medicine and national security here forward. It's really exciting.
And so the story that Dr. Gupton talks about, he actually wrote recommendation letters for my daughters who each got advanced degrees in chemistry. And I know his sister very, very well. And he sort of told a story of how he was invited to the White House and was going up there with the premise that he was actually going to hear the United States' story about how we're going to figure out a way to onshore generic medicine again. And when he got there, they said, no, you're actually here to write the United States plan on how we're going to not be reliant upon medicines from China anymore. And that's what they did. And they gave him $350 million to say, go execute. So it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah.
I mean, we're the civil engineering project, which is sort of cool, but
It could
this
be
part
neat
of it.
to get a little, maybe we can take advantage of their location and get a
Absolutely.
program
Dr.
here.
Edwards.
Because it's, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's just so many different elements of how it affects this community and beyond, so.
Very cool.
Well, with
Right.
that, thank you all so
Thank you,
much.
guys.
This was really wonderful.
Yeah.
Appreciate the direction today. We'll follow up with a doodle poll.
Good.
Okay. Thanks.